Episode 1, the tape that whispers back. The first thing you hear is breathing, not human, not animal, just wet, rhythmic pressure, like someone exhaling against your eardrum from inside the speaker. Then comes the hum, then the whisper, not in English, not in any language anyone online could recognize, but it feels like something you've heard before, in dreams, in fevers, in the second right before death. The live stream started at 9 p.m. Audience, 713 viewers. Host, Vera Ruiz, ex-journalist turned conspiracy podcaster, known for deep dives into lost Vatican documents, forbidden relics, and the Church's unrecorded miracles. Her title for the night, The Kiss Nun, a lost recording from 1947 the Vatican doesn't want you to hear. She pressed play at 9:14 p.m. and by 9:15, she was bleeding from the lips. The clip reconstructed from transcript, low distortion, shallow breathing. Female voice begins to murmur, in Italian, then Latin, then unknown. Lil labra di Dio non sai sono my chiefs. The lips of God never close. I kissed him and he bled into me, and I have not stopped speaking since. Forgive me, not for what I said, but for what he is still saying. Shriek, then laughter, then silence, then static. The stream went black. Chat exploded. Some thought it was a hoax. Some said they felt their own tongues twitch. And 13 users claimed they heard their own name whispered through their headphones, spoken in a voice they recognized but couldn't place. Vera Ruiz did not return to the live stream. Paramedics found her an hour later, still breathing, still conscious, but speaking rapidly in classical Hebrew, alternating with Aramaic and an unknown phonetic code. Even while sedated, she continued, not screaming, not mumbling, just preaching. Doctors couldn't explain the bleeding from her lips. There were no wounds, no rupture, only a trickle of crimson, moving in time with each syllable, as if something beneath her tongue was writing. The Vatican responded in 24 hours, not with denial, not with threats, but with a package delivered to the hospital, a rosary made of teeth, a cassette marked Sister Maravilla, confession number 1, and a note, do not listen to the rest. But the internet already had. The clip went viral. Clips spread. Fragments reposted. People began translating, parsing phonemes, building transcripts, and that's when the real change began. Viewers reported symptoms, bleeding gums, nightmares of being kissed by a mouth without a face, compulsive whispering in dead languages, drawing churches that didn't exist. One man woke up with verses carved into his chest. Words he claimed were never taught to him, but he remembered saying before being born. Back at the hospital, Vera Ruiz whispered something new, a phrase repeated every 2 minutes, whether asleep or awake. I'm not alone in here. She has stopped responding to her name, but when someone plays the tape again in her room, she smiles. Episode 1, the tape that whispers back. The first thing you hear is breathing, not human, not animal, just wet, rhythmic pressure, like someone exhaling against your eardrum from inside the speaker. Then comes the hum, then the whisper, not in English, not in any language anyone online could recognize, but it feels like something you've heard before, in dreams, in fevers, in the second right before death. The live stream started at 9 p.m. Audience, 713 viewers. Host, Vera Ruiz, ex-journalist turned conspiracy podcaster, known for deep dives into lost Vatican documents, forbidden relics, and the Church's unrecorded miracles. Her title for the night, The Kiss Nun, a lost recording from 1947 the Vatican doesn't want you to hear. She pressed play at 9:14 p.m., and by 9:15, she was bleeding from the lips. The clip reconstructed from transcript, low distortion, shallow breathing. Female voice begins to murmur, Italian, then Latin, then unknown. Lil labra di Dio non sai sono my chiefs. The lips of God never close. I kissed him and he bled into me, and I have not stopped speaking since. Forgive me, not for what I said, but for what he is still saying. Shriek, then laughter, then silence, then static. The stream went black. Chat exploded. Some thought it was a hoax. Some said they felt their own tongues twitch. And 13 users claimed they heard their own name whispered through their headphones, spoken in a voice they recognized but couldn't place. Vera Ruiz did not return to the live stream. Paramedics found her an hour later, still breathing, still conscious, but speaking rapidly in classical Hebrew, alternating with Aramaic and an unknown phonetic code. Even while sedated, she continued, not screaming, not mumbling, just preaching. Doctors couldn't explain the bleeding from her lips. There were no wounds, no rupture, only a trickle of crimson, moving in time with each syllable, as if something beneath her tongue was writing. The Vatican responded in 24 hours, not with denial, not with threats, but with a package delivered to the hospital, a rosary made of teeth, a cassette marked Sister Marvia, confession number 1, and a note, do not listen to the rest. But the internet already had. The clip went viral, clips spread, fragments reposted, people began translating, parsing phonemes, building transcripts, and that's when the real change began. Viewers reported symptoms, bleeding gums, nightmares of being kissed by a mouth without a face, compulsive whispering in dead languages, drawing churches that didn't exist. One man woke up with verses carved into his chest. Words he claimed were never taught to him, but he remembered saying before being born. Back at the hospital, Vera Ruiz whispered something new, a phrase repeated every 2 minutes, whether asleep or awake. I'm not alone in here. She has stopped responding to her name, but when someone plays the tape again in her room, she smiles. Episode 3, Those Who Listen Too Long. It began with a single viewer at SoulFresh 99, a theology student in Sao Paulo. He watched the leaked recording of Vera's voice 7 times, posted in a Reddit thread. Her voice keeps repeating in my head, even when I mute the video, even when I sleep. 2 days later, he uploaded a photo of his arm. Letters, no ink, no scarification, just raised flesh, curling in delicate Hebrew like braille for angels. Caption, I didn't write this. I woke up with it. He wasn't the only one. In Berlin, a philosophy professor collapsed mid-lecture, mumbling something that no one in the room understood, until the Arabic-speaking janitor turned pale and whispered. He just recited the full confession of Cain, but backwards. In Jakarta, a deaf girl began drawing elaborate diagrams in chalk. Symmetrical, sacred, precise. One symbol matched the sigil buried in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Another mirrored the carved altar in a church that no longer exists. Her mother said she hadn't drawn anything in years, until she saw the video. Back in Vera's room, the whispers continued. But now, they weren't only coming from her mouth. Doctors began hearing them in ventilation systems. The security guard, who never listened to the tape, walked past her door and heard a voice speaking to him through his walkie-talkie. Though no one had pressed a button, the voice said, I remember what you thought you forgot. Online forums exploded. They called it the tongue virus. Symptoms included glossolalia, speaking in unknown tongues, insomnia, nosebleeds, writing scripture while asleep, memory loss, specifically around trauma, and the worst one, the compulsion to speak a name you cannot unhear. Researchers found a pattern. Anyone who listened to Vera's voice for more than 7 minutes developed irreversible symptoms. But not everyone changed the same way. Some became messengers. Others became altars. In Kentucky, a man carved open his chest and filled it with pages of the Bible. Every verse related to speech, voice, or breath. When authorities found him, he was still alive, and he whispered he needed a pulpit. Vera, meanwhile, had stopped moving, but her mouth remained open. A low vibration pulsed through her teeth. Doctors placed their hands over her lips. Each one walked away crying, unable to explain why. One nurse quit on the spot. Her final note read, she told me the name of my daughter before she was born, and then told me how she'll die. By week's end, over 10,000 people had heard the full 7 minutes, and that's when the dreams began. The same dream, a across countries, across languages, a veiled nun walking backward across cathedral ceiling, whispering into mouths of children who had no lips. The church went silent, but Vera did not. She spoke only once that night, to no one in particular, to everyone at once. Those who listened too long are already writing me back. Episode 4, The Nun Who Kissed Fire, Italy, 1947. The convent of Santa Lucia sat crumbling on a hillside outside Bologna, abandoned even before the war ended. But behind its iron gates, 13 nuns remained, forgotten by time and untouched by light. Among them was Sister Maravilla, young, beautiful, devout, and too obedient for her own survival. Her journal, long thought destroyed, was recovered from the sealed reliquary weeks after Vera Ruiz fell silent. The pages smelled of incense and smoke. The ink bled in patterns when touched with holy water. One passage was marked in trembling red. The kiss came during the third vigil. I did not see his face, but I felt his mouth. It wasn't passion. It wasn't mercy. It was possession disguised as affection. The others called a miracle. The priest fainted, and Maravilla, she began to glow from the mouth outward. That night, the convent bells rang 13 times, though no one pulled the rope. The next day, she could no longer speak normally. Every sentence turned into prophecy. Every breath became a hymn. She said things she should know. Your son died screaming for Mary. Your husband lies with another, and she wears your rosary. God saw you touch yourself before prayer. He did not turn away. The sisters began to fear her, but the Mother Superior kissed her forehead and whispered, if he chose your mouth, then keep speaking until he stops. He never did. The Vatican was notified when the first nun tore out her own tongue, then the second, then the third, not from pain, but from envy. They believed the voice of God had touched Maravilla, and they wanted to empty themselves enough to be next. On the seventh day, Sister Maravilla locked herself in the chapel. She lit all 313 candles and began speaking in reverse, not just the words, the grammar, the thought, the soul. The air worked, paint peeled from saints, and behind the altar, a mouth formed in the stone, not metaphor, not hallucination, a real mouth, lined with teeth made of bone and prayer, lips cracked with gold, and from it came a whisper, finish what I started in Eden. She stepped forward, trembling, and kissed it. The fire erupted instantly, not from the candles, not from oil, but from her breath. Her mouth became flame. Every word since that moment burned, even if it wasn't heard aloud. The other nuns were found days later, curled into ash, hands clasped, mouth sewn shut, except hers. Hers was open, wide, smiling. Vatican records list her death as self-immolation. But no body was found, only her habit, folded, still warm, and inside it, a voice still whispered. I did not speak for him. He spoke through me because he could not bear his own silence. Episode 5, The God Who Does Forgive. Father Matteo Aguilar hadn't worn the collar in over a decade, not since Rome silenced him, not since he stood at the pulpit and said the words that no priest was ever meant to say. If God is love, then why is the silence louder than our screams? But when he saw the news about Vera Ruiz, the woman who bled from her mouth and spoke in fire, he knew he'd heard that voice before. Once, long ago, it was during a Vatican inquiry into a failed exorcism in Ghana. The possessed boy died before Matteo arrived, but his voice had lingered on tape, and it whispered something Matteo had never forgotten. I did not fall. I was pushed for asking who taught God to love. That same sentence was now being murmured from Vera's hospital bed, in the exact same rhythm, the same inhuman softness, like breath behind your bones. Matteo flew to Madrid. He entered Vera's room with no crucifix, no holy water, only a pocket Bible and a rosary made from ash and wire. Vera was seated, hands folded, eyes closed, but when he stepped into the room, she opened her mouth, and something else looked out through her smile. Welcome back, Matteo. You still ask questions, don't you? The doctors couldn't hear. Only him. Only the ones who had once carried the flame and been burned. He whispered, "What are you?" Vera stood, slow, reverent, and then spoke with two voices at once. "I am not God. I was his flame. I was his purity. I was Seraph." The room grew cold. The shadows stretched like hands, and Vera's body flickered, as if the air were forgetting how to hold her shape. "You called me fallen, but I was cast. I refused to close my eyes to what he did not forgive. I asked, why does mercy end where obedience begins? He tore out my name, but I kept my mouth." Mateo felt his knees, not in worship, in horror. "You're not here to save us." "No, I'm here to finish what began when he said, why?" He tried to pray, but the rosary burned in his hand, and from Vera's mouth came the sound of thousands whispering at once, as if every soul that had ever been silenced now used her as their speaker. She stepped closer, placed a single finger against his lips, and said, "Don't waste time asking for forgiveness. He hasn't granted it since Eden." Mateo screamed, not from pain, from memory, because suddenly he remembered all the confessions he had ever heard, all at once, and behind every one, a presence listening, smiling, taking notes. He was removed from the hospital in restraints, mumbling the same phrase over and over. "She's not the devil. She's a part of heavenly buried." That night, Vera's lips stopped bleeding, but she began smiling in her sleep. And when the nurses checked the walls, they found something carved into the plaster above her bed. Seraphim remember everything. Episode 6. Speak his name, and your body forgets itself. They all tried to say it. The name Vera whispered in her sleep. The name that bent light and twisted microphones. The name that appeared carved in teeth marks across her window one morning. Not Hebrew, not angelic, not of any alphabet designed for lungs and blood, but the human tongue, so eager command, tried anyway. The first was a linguist from Prague. He broke the name into phonetics, wrote it on his whiteboard, sounded it out on livestream. His nose began to bleed. His fingers bent backward. He collapsed mid-syllable. When they found him, he had carved one word into the hardwood floor with his bare toe, unwritten. The second was worse. A YouTuber, 78,000 views in under an hour. He titled the video, "Speaking the Forbidden Seraph Name Gone Wrong?" He tried it twice. On the third attempt, his jaw unhinged itself. Literally, the bones melted. His tongue split into 7 tendrils. And from the back of his throat, a voice not as whispered, "Speak it again, and I will finish carving you." The Vatican intercepted the footage, took the video down. Too late, clips circulated, memes, breakdowns, reactions, and slowly, imitations. Teenagers tried to pronounce it for clout. Streamers made it a challenge. One by one, they began to change. Subtle at first, skin developing script-like ridges, vocal cords emitting harmonics too low for human hearing, eyes reflecting architecture that didn't exist, then internal bleeding, mouths whispering while the host slept, and in some cases, hosts whispering while no one else slept. Doctors couldn't explain it. Neurologists said it was mass hysteria. Faith leaders called it punishment. Only those who remembered Sister Marvia's original recordings knew the truth. This name wasn't just sound. It was a blueprint, a template, and saying it aloud was like installing a new soul into your body, one that didn't understand how to use flesh properly. Vera remained unchanged, still breathing, still smiling, still silent, but in the margins of her hospital bed, etched in blood and breath, he needs mouths, he needs forms, he needs invitations. By the end of the week, 18 people across 6 countries had attempted the name. 17 were hospitalized. The 18th vanished, but not entirely, in his apartment, written on the fog mirror. I pronounced him correctly. Now he's writing me back. And that night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., Vera opened her mouth, spoke only one word, and every speaker that had ever played her voice turned on by itself, humming a pitch only bones could hear. From the walls came the echo, "Speak me again, I will make you forget your skin." Episode 7, the church that was never built. The man had been blind since birth. Elias Ramirez, 71 years old, former choir director, now a recluse in northern Spain. He had never heard Vera's name, but on the morning of Pentecost, someone played her voice through the radio in the room next to his. Within minutes, he began to draw, not sketch, architect, with chalk, on the floor, with hand that had never seen shape or shadow. He moved with precision, murmuring under his breath. The echo must have a house. He cannot keep speaking from borrowed lungs. The diagrams were captured on video. An impossible structure, geometrically sound, but mathematically heretical. A building made of concentric silence, glass bones, and a choir loft suspended with no support, a dome shaped like a larynx. Every entrance pointed inward, every window refused light, and in the center, a pulpit shaped like a mouth mid-breath. The Vatican declared demonic architecture, but 3 days later, in a meadow outside Avila, something began to rise from the soil. Not construction, emergence. The grass curled away, the earth cracked like parchment, and beneath it, stone, warm to the touch, engraved with verses that bled when read aloud. Locals reported hearing chanting with no source. Farm animals refused to pass within 50 meters. Children began humming unknown hymns in their sleep. By the end of the week, it stood 12 meters high, unfinished, breathing, shaped exactly like Elias' drawing. He had never visited the field. He had never touched a pen before that day. And then he vanished. Only one sentence was left behind, scratched into the underside of his mattress. He needed eyes that never learned to see the wrong God. The building was dubbed La Capilla del Eco, the chapel of the echo. Pilgrims came. They left changed. Some walked away mute. Some began bleeding from the ears when they heard bells that weren't ringing. Some reported seeing a woman praying beneath the floor, mouthing words that peeled the paint from the walls. Scientists could not measure the sound inside the chapel. Recordings played back silence. But those who entered described hearing something different each time. Their father's final confession. A lullaby never sung. The sound of God choking on his own breath. No services were held. No crosses were hung. No altar was placed. And yet, people knelt, as if someone had whispered just enough to remind them where. At 3:33 a.m. on the 7th day, the chapel doors opened by themselves, and Vera, still in her hospital bed, smiled, though no one had told her it had been built. She whispered one sentence. The body has a tongue now. Episode 8, the language of nails. They called it the translator's curse. At first, it was anecdotal, isolated cases. Scholars, linguists, coders, anyone who tried to translate Vera's speech fully. Not just hear it, but decode it. Dr. Ivana Schutz, a semiotician from Berlin, was the first. She compiled a 400-page lexicon of Vera's glossolalia, cross-referenced Hebrew root structures with Enochian glyphs. She believed she cracked a heavenly dialect embedded in human trauma. Then, during a live stream presentation of her findings, she coughed up a fingernail. Not her own. It was blackened, ancient, etched with tiny letters. Later that night, she began to choke in her sleep. Doctors performed an emergency tracheotomy. Inside her throat, they found 13 more nails, curved like claws, each inscribed with a single word. Together, they formed a sentence. But when read aloud by a nurse, all the hospital lights went out for 6 minutes. The nurse hasn't spoken since. Others followed. A Vatican cryptologist, a teenage polyglot from Rio, a deaf woman who felt the rhythms of Vera's speech in her spine. Each one began manifesting language physically. Some wrote in their sleep. Some bled in patterns. Some developed stigmata, not in their palms, but on their tongues. And all of them died before finishing the final phrase. One man made it further than the rest. Eli Navarro, a former Jesuit turned AI linguist, He fed Vera's voice into a neural decoder, trained it on every dead language known to man. The program began generating patterns, not words, but sounds that triggered emotional reactions. Anger, sorrow, ecstasy, grief. These aren't words, he said. Their wounds try to become language. On day 5, Eli went silent. He locked himself in his study. Cameras recorded him writing something on the wall. Over and over, in his own blood, the phrase repeated 33 times. My body wants to believe, but my mouth knows better. Then, he opened his mouth and spoke a single syllable, one not recorded by the cameras, not heard by human ears, but felt by every piece of technology within 200 meters. Everything shut down, and Eli collapsed. Autopsy revealed no heart. In its place, a lump of hardened keratin, shaped like a nail, still warm, with microscopic ridges that formed an impossible code. One word, no match in any language. But Vera, watching the news from her hospital bed, mouthed it silently. Her teeth bled, and a voice, echoing in 1,000 hard drives across the globe, whispered. The word was not meant to be spoken. It was meant to become someone. Episode 9, the devotion that eats flesh. At first, it looked like fasting. The followers of Vera, those who called themselves the Echoed, began losing weight. Quickly, beautifully, miraculously. No illness, no weakness, only the glow of conviction and the hunger of something older than need. Videos surfaced of men and women smiling, radiant, bone-thin but alive, saying things like, I gave up food when I realized his word was enough. I don't need skin when he has given me meaning. They weren't starving. They were surrendering. The first to disappear was Marisol Anoche, 24, Mexico City. She live-streamed her prayer vigil for 99 hours, drank only holy water, spoke only in the tongue of Vera. On the 100th hour, she fell silent, smiled, and then vanished, not metaphorically. Literally, her camera caught it, frame by frame. Her outline dissolved into static, as if her flesh had been translated. Her followers screamed, not in terror, in worship. They called it transubstantiation 2.0. No longer bred into body, but believer into word. All across the world, it happened again, in basements, in churches, in parks where prayer circles chanted the forbidden syllables of the seraph. People began losing mass, fingertips, then toes, then faces, smiling as their features faded into a phrase no one could hear. One woman held her son's hand until the moment he vanished. All he said before becoming air was, I am closer to now than skin ever let me be. The Vatican called it mass spiritual hysteria, but privately, one cardinal wrote in his journal, if this is hysteria, why do I see my own flesh thinning when I say her name in prayer? Back in her hospital bed, Vera no longer needed to speak. Her presence had become loud enough. Monitors around her began flickering in rhythm with heartbeat-shaped scripture, and visitors who stood in the room too long found themselves forgetting what time it was, what body they were in, what name they used to carry. The echo began building shrines made of nothing, literal emptiness. 12 stones arranged in a circle, surrounding the absence of the 13th, and they prayed not to be filled, but to be erased, because to them, disappearance wasn't death. It was union. The word cannot be doubted if there is no mouth left to speak doubt. The flesh cannot rebel if there is no more flesh. In one final broadcast before her voice fractured electronics around the globe, Vera whispered, when belief is full, the body empties. Come closer, come cleaner, come wordless. And that night, 13 new vanishings occurred simultaneously, all in different countries, all in silence, all wearing smiles carved into lips that were no longer there. Episode 10, the silence between two imams. For the first time in 47 days, Vera Ruiz went silent. No whispers, no blood, no glow beneath her tongue. Just breath, steady, still. The hospital room held its breath with her. The world, almost at 3:33 a.m., monitors flatlined, not because she died, but because her body had stopped registering as human. Doctors rushed in. No pulse, no readings, no blinking, but she was awake and smiling. Across the globe, those who had once heard her voice woke up screaming, not in pain, but in absence, as if something sacred had been ripped away. A hunger louder than sound, a grief born from the loss of a presence they never consented to carry. One survivor wrote in charcoal, "Her silence is a sound I cannot forget." Another typed blindly, "Something is knocking behind the quiet." Then came the broadcasts. All at once, thousands of phones, laptops, and radios, whether powered on or not, began transmitting static, but only for 7 seconds. And only those who had once heard Vera could make sense of what came after. A single syllable, not spoken, carved into the bone of the world. It didn't come from the mouth. It came from between two imams. From that crack between "I believe" and "it is finished," children covered their ears. Priests collapsed mid-circle. One nun vomited rosary beads, each engraved with the same symbol, a circle split by silence. And Vera, still silent, turned her head and wept. The tears were clear, but as they hit the floor, they hissed like hot wax on skin. The tiles beneath her bed cracked open, and beneath them, a mouth, not made of flesh, not made of stone, made of language. It opened wide, but did not speak. Instead, it listened, and from within its darkness, a new sound was heard. "I was never meant to stop. You were never meant to survive me." Outside, the sky darkened, not from clouds, but from scripture written in reverse, crawling across the firmament like veins on heaven's corpse. And in that moment, people across the world opened their mouths at once, not to scream, not to pray, but to complete the silence. Because silence, they now knew, was not absence. It was an unfinished sentence. And Vera had paused only so the world could speak it. Episode 11, The Apostle Without a Soul. His name was Jonas Del Toro, a theology student from Salamanca. Quiet, brilliant, undeniably faithful. He watched Vera's live stream on loop for 12 days straight. He didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't move, except to write. When they finally found him, he had covered every inch of his apartment with one phrase: "Let the word live inside me if the soul must leave." And then he fell silent, but not in the way others had. He didn't vanish, didn't bleed, didn't pray. He simply stopped. Breathing? Yes. Heart? Steady. Eyes? Open but unfocused. His body remained alive, but something was missing. Not brain dead, not in a coma. Vacant, as if his soul had simply stepped out. They brought him to a private facility. No family, no visitors, until one nurse, curious, touched his hand, just briefly, and heard in her own voice inside her own head, "I took the money. I said it was cancer. It wasn't. We never found out." She collapsed. 3 days later, it happened again. A janitor brushed against Jonas's arm while changing sheets. He froze, then began sobbing. Later, he admitted, "I buried the kitten alive when I was 12. No one knew, not even God." Word spread. People came from all over, not to heal him, but to touch him. Because when you touched Jonas Del Toro, you didn't hear him. You heard yourself. Or rather, the version of yourself you never wanted to meet again. Confessions that were buried. Lies told to mirrors. Thoughts dismissed as shadows. The church tried to intervene, but they couldn't explain it. How could a man with no speech, no awareness, no motion, recite sins he never committed? How could he speak truths only the soul of another could know? One cardinal visited, touched his forehead, collapsed into seizure, whispered one phrase: "The book of life is not a book. It's a body." They sealed Jonas in a soundproof glass room, not for safety, but because the more people touched him, the more he began to change. His skin grew pale, translucent, veins darkened into scripture lines. His lips never moved, but each fingertip began to pulse, glowing faintly with a rhythm that matched Vera's heartbeat. Vera, who now hadn't spoken in days, opened her eyes for the first time in weeks, and whispered, "He is my confessional. He holds your rot, so I don't have to." That night, 7 people snuck into the facility, touched Jonas. Each screamed, each confessed, each died within an hour. But when their bodies were autopsied, the same phrase was found branded on the underside of their tongues. Forgiveness was never the point. Episode 12. God wasn't the only one listening. The journal had no name, no title, no leather cover, only thin, yellowing pages bound by red thread, sealed in candle wax. It was found inside the altar of the ruined Chapel of the Echo, days after the structure had imploded without warning. Charred bones were all that remained, except for this book. And on the first page, written in wax and blood, Final Testament of Sister Maravilla. The last entry was dated June 17, 1947. 2 days after her mouth first caught fire. It began like a prayer, but it ended like a confession. I thought it was God who kissed me, because his name was the first thing I tasted in the flame. But then he stopped answering, and something else did not. She wrote the nights that followed, how the other nuns slept, how she stayed awake, how the shadows behind the tabernacle grew longer without light. She described the sensation of being observed by a presence that blinked sideways, not demonic, not divine, but curious. It did not come to save me. It came to see what I would become once I believed hard enough to forget who I was. In the margins, she wrote a name, not a human name, not Hebrew, not angelic. It looked like a sound trying to form teeth. No one could read it, but Vera did. From her hospital bed, she opened her mouth and whispered. He listened because God never would. The journal continued. I asked him once, "Are you the devil?" He said, "No, I am what heaven refused to record." I asked if he was falling. He laughed, said, "I was never invited high enough to fall." Maravilla began writing upside down the pages. Blood, ash, tears. Her hand trembled by the end. But the last sentence was perfectly clean, etched with a nail. If God is the Word, then he is the question mark that came first. That same day, Vera's body temperature dropped to 33.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Still alive, still conscious, but the machines monitoring her short-circuited from the inside out. And then, on the ceiling above her bed, written in soot and moisture, "He heard you before you were created. Now you must decide who you're actually speaking to." Because the terrifying truth wasn't that God was silent. It was that something else never stopped listening. Something older than heaven, unwritten by time, hungry for voice, and patient, so impossibly patient. And now, after Vera, after Maravilla, after mouths, the nails, the disappearances, it was finally ready to speak back. Episode 13, The Final Whisper. At exactly 3:33 a.m., Vera Ruiz opened her eyes. Not slowly, not gently, like someone waking not from sleep, but from centuries of silence on behalf of something else. Her room had changed. No walls, no nurses, no machines, only air that rippled like it remembered screaming. In a vast black field lit by no sun, no moon, only scripture glowing beneath her feet. Before her stood it, no face, no name, no shape that stayed still. It moved like it was made of voices forgotten mid-prayer. It breathed like parchment being torn in reverse. It didn't speak. It waited, and Vera understood this was not judgment. It was invitation. In her hand appeared the first word. Not a letter, not a sound. A piece of something she had carried in her throat since the first time she whispered in her crib, before she ever knew what language was. And she could give it, offer it, let it speak through her. Let the world hear the thing that God refused to answer. Let the question become flesh. If she said yes, humanity would never be alone again, because it would never stop talking. Every mouth would carry a fragment of its voice. Every child would be born with a name already whispered into their marrow. No more silence. No more forgetting. only presence, endless, unblinking, hungry. If she said no, she would have to carry every word ever unsaid into a tomb made of her own body. She would become the lock, the last wall, and never speak again, not even in thought. Vera wept, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing what love costs and is returned. She raised a word. It leaned forward. The field grew hot. The scripture beneath her turned red. She whispered, I have been the mouth. I have been the flame. I have been the hunger that prayed too long. But I will not be the echo. She swallowed the word. Oh, and every voice across the world fell silent. Radio stopped. Infants went still. Wind forgot to howl. The creature reeled, not in rage, in grief. It shrank, as if unspoken truth was more painful than lies. And it said, for the first and only time, you could have been my forever. Vera closed her mouth, forever, and vanished. They found her hospital bed empty, except for a page, blank. But if you stare long enough, you swear you can feel your tongue trying to form a sentence that never quite arrives. Some say she's buried under the silence between heartbeats. Others say she became a punctuation mark at the end of heaven's longest sentence. But those who once heard her, in dreams and static and trembling, still wake up at 3:33 a.m., tasting blood and whispering, the lips of God never close.